Richard Reynolds. I'm very excited to have you in this podcast. Richard, my good brother, how are you doing?
Good, and keen to chat and hopefully hopefully learn a bit as we chat as well. So anyway,
Yeah, so why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
okay, yeah. So I'm Richard Reynolds. I'm the director for institutional development within Vision Fund, which is World Vision's microfinance arm. I've been with World Vision and Vision Fund for about 25 years and about 37 years in kind of development work. So quite a long time, mainly in the microfinance world, but also a little bit in the sort of emergency response. I'm a US citizen, but originally, as the accent probably shows, I'm from the UK. So,
Yeah, that's great, Richard. It's so great to learn about your experience of so many years. And lately, you have been very passionate about this idea of continuous improvement. And why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the things you have been doing in the last year or months
mhm,
in this area?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So then in my present role, which I've been in around 8 months, where I'm actually sort of more of an internal consultant who provides advice to our MFIs and microfinance institutions. And working, we have a network of 26, but I'm mainly working with about four of them. And we've sort of been trying to work out what's the best way to work with them. And I remember, and in fact, that's where we first met, was a workshop in DC, and sort of sitting in on that to sort of understand a little bit about Kaizen. And I sort of quite liked it, but wasn't quite sure how it fitted. Sort of, I saw it fitting at the strategy level, but sort of how it could fit with our sort of work in advising MFIs. So I thought, well, let's kind of chat to you a little bit more and see if there's some space. And so we've worked with you. We've sort of had two really great workshops where I think we've really seen how it can really power or empower people to really focus on change that they want. I think it's a great way of just people discovering what's going on in their organization. I think I remember we just one key bit for me was listening to a, a loan officer in the workshop explaining to the senior management team who were on his table what was actually going on, and it was just sort of this sort of eye-opening sort of moment. And then again in Mexico, we were doing this sort of end-to-end process, and just at one point, I think you said to the loan officers to give each their feedback, and it was for them all sharing because they were all showing that they through that looking at their present process, they were seeing all these pain points and actually being able to sort of express, they literally were pain points, which were sort of meaning they were ending up having to work extra hours, travel extra miles, and really being able to both vocalize that, but also have a mechanism to make changes within the organization, I thought was really, really exciting. So that's what we're at the moment. We're kind of now in this sort of rather daunting point of actually now us running workshops without you, which is a little bit scary, but I think we're on the right track. And as you said, you trust the process. And I will keep saying that and keep trusting. So anyway, that's what we've been doing the last couple of few 6 months or so.
Great. Thank you, Richard, for that insight. And, you know, one of the things I learned as we were doing this together, um, there was a Marjolaine, which I send greetings, is one of huge Kaizen champion as well. she asked me this question long time ago. She goes like, Carlos, how do you do Gemba walks in a transactional process? And kind of, I kept thinking about that. Gemba, as we know, is where the action happens. But actually, what you describe and how I experienced that with you and the team was the answer to the question. Because when you're doing this Kaizen and you have the leaders there and the team who they own the process, they're walking the leaders through the process, they explaining this is how we do it. These are the pain points. That's really, it's almost like bringing the Gemba instead of
Mhm.
having the leaders going. It's another mechanism to have the leaders really understand what's going on. So
Mhm.
I think that's a really important point of the work that you and Michael and Shalinka are doing.
Well, yeah, and maybe, and this is, I think, another, I'm still very much at the beginning of learning on this whole sort of continuous improvement Kaizen approach. But I think one of the bits was sort of realizing it's not a workshop.
Mm,
It's a way of working and a whole process that the organization and you as individuals need to adopt. And I think the Gemba I think was one of those real points of realizing that's actually how I work, and that's kind of but actually putting it in a frame
mm,
and a way of working. I think that was one of the bits I really liked. So, when you go to visit an MFI,
mm,
or if you're a manager in an MFI, the the risk is, the easy option is you just go and you visit the head office
mm,
and you maybe go for a little visit to a few clients, and that's all you see. And I don't think that's the, really the Gemba.
mm,
And I think going, so what we've been doing on these visits, we would spend maybe two-thirds, at least half the time visiting branches, talking to loan officers, branch managers, talking to clients, and not just a token one or the one that is kind of organized for you to visit, but to really get to hear and understand what's going on. And I think, that if you combine that with I like data and looking and seeing, so you before your visit, you really look at doing all the data analysis to kind of look and see what's going on in branches, what are some of the possible reasons for things not working as well as they could from the data, and then you kind of listen again what people are saying. And I think that's a thing for anyone, whether you're in a global role or if you're in a national role, as an MFI leader. If you're not in the field where the Gamba is happening, I think you lose so much. So, or
mm,
the opposite, you go to where the action is, you gain so much. So,
mm.
I think the workshop definitely helps that, but I think part of that is just shifting that to be a way of working as an organization. So,
Which I think you're highlighting a very important point, Richard. So, something that I used to talk to Debbie a lot about this, and Sue and other leaders in World Vision, that the continuous improvement, it's fueled by the mindset of leaders being humble. And as simple as that sounds, it's very difficult because, first of all, if you think about it, the humble leaders are the ones that I'm gonna reject that idea, right?
mhm,
That they're good leaders. And so then how do you make an organization copy that way of leadership and then use that to fuel the entire culture of an organization,
mhm,
right? But if you think about the model that Toyota uses in leadership, humility is such an important point
mhm,
because, to your point, and I remember you talking about this, you go to the Gemba, the same Michael, to really understand and listen to the people, right? Not to tell them what to do or but
Hmm.
just to really understand what are the problems and how you can create a space for them
Hmm.
to solve them. And I think that's very challenging.
Yeah, no, I think, and it's an interesting, I think one of the other bits is that, yes, it's having the sort of top leadership buy into that is key. But I think also, you recognize that, an MFI is made up of lots of groups of leaders. So each branch is sort of at some level quite autonomous. And so if you can get
Mm,
branches to operate, maybe you don't get the whole organization, but you get branches to, so I think it's maybe not being too stuck on saying, well, we have to get the management to get all their buying before we get anywhere. I think it's sort of you're doing it both ways. And so I like the the Gazelle Speed
mhm.
workshop as a way that you both, I think you influence the leadership team, but you also in, influence people in branches that they feel they can do things. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. No, I like that. And also, I like how these ideas, especially in the humanitarian world, um, or emergency response, apply because you're right. You don't have to wait until the entire
Mhm.
organization is doing it before you see the impact that
Mhm.
this application has on the customers and the people that we serve. But then also, I think you have been just on fire when it comes to continuous improvement, and you're like, Carlos, I want to uh, learn more about this, and you read a book, The Toyota Way, and then you wrote an article that I was very impressed because you went principle by principle
Mhm.
from the book, and then you made that connection with Vision Fund or a microfinance. And I just was fascinated. Even I was fascinated hearing you few days ago speaking about some of these principles and how
Mhm.
they apply to the microfinance world. So tell us a bit more about that and
Yeah,
some of the things you've learned.
again, it was sort of part I thought, you know, we I said to you, what would be one book um you'd recommend? So you said Toyota Way, so I invested in a book um and read it, and I kind of thought, okay, how do I internalize it a bit? Sort of look and see, okay, how does it all what would it mean? Because that's a car company. We're a microfinance provider, and so quite different. Uh, but actually, really saw quite a lot of the principles were things that, on the whole, overlapped. So, trying to think what things I really liked, because actually most of it I did. Um, I think the whole idea of waste. And maybe again, this is maybe a bit like the whole Gemba. I realize I have a certain mindset that I get really annoyed about waste. And we're in organizations that have lots of waste. Waste is unnecessary requirements that either, you know, we we build in because someone thinks they're important, and then someone adds something else and something else, and we never stop and get rid of all these other requirements. So we have a lot of things that just make it very difficult to do our work sometimes because they're internal things in the organization. And I think sort of just looking at those, when I'm at an airport, I'm looking in the line, just looking at, you know, how many, or every airport does security. Every airport does it slightly differently. That's crazy. It's like, and you just look at things where, people don't have, they've just got a slightly different process and no one understands it. And you're sort of thinking, this is it's a lot of waste here, of time and effort. And so I think as I've looked at, that whole concept of trying to look and say, okay, asking, does it add value? And if it doesn't, is it something we can either eliminate or reduce because we have to do it? There's lots of things that, we have to do because we're regulated in a country, and there's certain risk policies that we need to follow. So there are things, but how do we minimize that to make it at that optimal level? And there's lots of other things that we do, and then you realize no one knows why we did it. So I think, and then this whole, the five whys, just getting to that root cause, I think that's all bits around that I really like. I think one thing I haven't got to what it means, what it really could, how it could work, but I kind of think it is this whole idea of the Kanban,
Mhm.
this idea of a visual um, way of thinking. You realize that while we have, we're talking in a screen, we read lots of stuff on our phones, on our computers, but I don't think we're quite made to be just a digital machine. I think so much is visual beyond that, and how to capture that. And I think that's where I get the sense that what Toyota saw was the way of creating this sort of visual, physical way of showing um, numbers that drive, or in their case, to pull things. I think is quite powerful. So when we're so in microfinance, we're not producing a car, but we're producing a loan. But the way we operate is very much production to targets. And I think, as I kind of understand, that's sort of the Ford approach. You had a target of producing this. The Toyota was much more being pulled by how much what their customer wanted, and that was pulling it. And so you needed numbers to sort of drive so that you could look, each of those numbers pulled the next part of the production line along. And I think that's looking how we can create that in a loan process. And if you have it in a branch, I think you're probably there when I was sharing this, that we visited one branch, and I was observing there was what, 8 people, 9 people, all looking at their phones because that's where the data was. No one was interact. So when you interact, even like here, at least we're looking at each other.
Mhm.
We're we're having there's some kind of connection. When you're physically together, that's even stronger. And that's where I think real communication happens. And I think that's where to me, the Kanban is something that could change how we operate. So, but it's still an idea in my mind. So we'll have to have another conversation when I've seen if we can experiment with them. So I think those would be that, and just the whole Gemba, I think, were the things that I really really liked. But yeah, I think just so maybe the other bits, and this as much came from you sharing, I think, this idea of respect, and the Japanese perspective on respect, which is that if you see something that's not working and you don't seek to change that, you actually don't respect people. Putting it the other way, if you see something and you seek to change it, to improve it, you are respecting the staff impacted by that. And I kind of felt that was a really I think we have a very passive view of respect. Respect is um, you know, that we're nice to people and we listen to them, but actually we don't do anything. And so I think that's kind of the yeah, I really liked that sort of idea that of sort of building that sense of respect into how you work. So yeah, that would be my thoughts on the Toyota way. Uh,
You know what? I think there's so much we could unpack. But let me stay with the idea that you mentioned about respect, especially because we work in organizations that do good work for people outside of the organization, right? Like
yeah.
communities and things like that. And isn't it interesting that we have a sense of respect in terms of the social aspect of the work we do? But then sometimes when you look at internally, you're right. Like
Mhm.
we're not showing respect to the staff or the people, the employees, and I think that's very shocking. At least it was for me
Mhm.
to see that because I think the same level of respect that we show outside should be inside. And I think as what you said is really important. Is yeah, we kind of have this idea of respect of very passive, right? Like listening to people and all that. But then, really, when you look at continuous improvement and the idea of, in a very relentless way, removing waste and making processes more efficient so that people don't have to waste time.
Mhm.
And I remember in Lesotho, we did a Kaizen where after they finished, they said, finally, I was able to go uh, and do my workout in the weekend because before I was doing all this close end in finance.
Mhm.
And it just, that connection between the time where people spend in their work when they have inefficient processes. I think that you're spot on that point. Um, and then the other thing about the idea that you mentioned that I think is really something you're thinking about. Um, Jennifer Katongole, another continuous improvement champion, she was the one who actually pointed to me this Gembutsu idea of looking at the real thing, which is what you're saying about the phones
Yeah.
and all that. And what is interesting is this idea of visual management. When everybody's looking at the same thing, right? Like you said, collectively, it just brings a different type of energy.
Mhm.
And I feel like the challenge now in this era of technology is how much we are losing that, right? Because even sometimes when we do Kaizen, sometimes people say like, Carlos, could we map the process on a virtual board? But there's
Yeah.
a different type of energy when you're in a room and then
Mhm.
you're mapping things and you're seeing the same information together, which I think that's what you're probably
Yeah.
thinking about is like how can we continue, yes, using technology and maximize technology,
Mhm.
but when it's smart, right, to have something that it's more collaborative
Yeah.
and where everybody is
Mhm.
looking at the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, and I think it's that sense of it, you all feel part of it. I think when you go digital, someone's writing it.
Hmm.
So it's not so, but they're controlling it because you can't go onto their computer and,
Hmm.
maybe at some point we'll get to that point where everything is so fluid that you could, but at the moment it's still very much that it sort of separates us rather than
Hmm.
brings us together. So
Yeah. One thing I also want to share, Richard, about the work that you, Michael, Shalinka are doing is that I think you understood quickly that this is more than just a bunch of tools, but it's more a cultural change. And I really applaud what you're doing. For example, you wrote the article and then you're doing sessions with
mhm.
the staff. And a lot of people are showing up to those sessions because they want to learn
Mm.
and you helping them reflect. on these principles, it just has an impact that sometimes is hard to measure, but it's real that you're really empowering people to think differently. Even the day before yesterday, you were talking about experiment,
Mhm.
which is one of the huge principles of continuous improvement. Is you have to do it because that's where the learning is coming. So I really applaud what you're doing with building this community and trying to change the culture.
Yeah, and I think it's nice because it's a less hierarchical group, which is kind of nice. You know, and that is the advantage of a digital thing that you anyone can join. And yeah, we've had a good yeah, we're on our third one, and we still had I think we had 45 people, which is really good. You know, we've yeah, so it's you know, and yeah, we'll see. Does it change anything? That you know, that's we'll see. But yeah, it's you know, it's encouraging people listening, and yeah,
Yeah,
and
but it really does, Richard. And I think you're gonna start hearing stories that will encourage you and the team of individuals um, really making those improvements. And the other thing I like about continuous improvement is that it works at a personal level, meaning the people who are doing continuous improvement and the people that you gave the tools and you're creating the space, their fulfillment about their job grows. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't see, but it's very important. And I think you're going to hear more and more stories of people doing small changes, but what it means for them is having a better experience in life. And so
mhm.
I think that's really important.
Mm. No,
Anyway, so
well, maybe
go ahead.
just to add it, you know, I think it's more that's you know, I think as you said, you know, I think for me, what I really like about it is something I like it myself. It's good for me, and I kind of think that's so you're doing something that you think it's really good for other people, but you really enjoy it for yourself. And I kind of think that's kind of so then is it kind of work or is it it's just you being yourself, you know? So it's yeah, I like yeah, how it sort of connects, yeah, and it's not a this is work and everything else, you know.
Mm.
As I said, I'm continually trying to work on my how much luggage I need. So on my recent trip, I just had one backpack, and you know, so and that was like a 6 day trip. So yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah, no,
So
I can see you're having fun, but also I can see that you have been challenged yourself because that's the other thing I really admire about you is that in some of these settings where you have done this for many years that in some ways you know the answer to some of these questions, but seeing you behaving more as a coach than as somebody who's giving people the solution is core to continuous improvement. And I think it really speaks about how this idea of continuous improvement is about challenging ourselves as individuals, right, to become a better version or a different version of who we are. So I really like that. But let me ask you something. So before we finish this, what advice I'm gonna challenge you on this. What advice would you give to senior leaders in Vision Fund to um, speed up the pace when it comes to continuous improvement? And of course, we will extrapolate this to other organizations. But since you're close to the Vision Fund, what advice would you give to those leaders?
tricky one. Um, yeah, I think so. So maybe a first reflection is I wish I'd got involved in this earlier in my career. I
Mm.
think that's maybe one thing. So thinking on that lines, I think, you know, I would encourage the organization to give more space to it.
Mhm.
I think it's kind of a thing. I think you have to you have to be maybe you have to become a believer.
Mm,
And I think sometimes that's hard in a workshop where you're not so connected with it.
mhm,
And so I was just thinking, how would our leadership, again, this is the thing with the strategy. I was sitting in that and I was sort of, did we really get the connection with with how it work sort of in the field as such? So yeah, I think I would just I don't think you can ever I don't think it is something that sort of magically goes super fast.
mhm,
I think it needs to be something that evolves. And so I guess I would just encourage people to give give space and recognition. I think what we're looking to do is to show results, and that results of data can show improvements, and then that's something that will uh, drive increased adoption of the approach. So yeah, I'm not really answering your question.
No, I think you are because
Yeah,
I do think that what you're saying is one of the key responsibilities of leadership is creating the space,
yeah, yeah.
right? No, number one. And then the second point you're also highlighting is also the patient aspect that goes
Mhm.
with this because it's not a magic bullet, right?
Yeah.
And then the maybe another point that I will probably, as you were sharing, I was thinking about the role of the upper management, and also sometimes I feel accountability can be a huge help for continuous improvement to continue. Because if leaders help teams with the accountability, which you and I know is hard,
Hmm.
that can drive a lot of change.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe one thing, if you have ways of showing, within the organization that people are at the Gemba, I kind of think, like in World Vision, I kind of every picture I see of JBK, he's in the field.
Mm,
He's not, yeah, there's a few in the meetings, but he's in the field, he's talking to beneficiaries, he's talking to field workers, and I kind of think that's, you can create a metric for people, yeah, of, in our work in, how many branches you visited, sort of
mm,
for, that people go to branches when they, not just for the purpose, just to say they've, they visit becomes a tick box exercise, but I think going to branches helps to get a visual understanding of what's really going on. So
mm.
yeah, so I think
I like
maybe
that. I
yeah,
like that idea of like developing the type of metrics, right? That
yeah,
pushes leaders to
yeah,
really exercise that behavior of going to the Gemba.
yeah, yeah. No, I think,
Yeah.
like just going back to the Toyota way, I think it's if they didn't have a standard, they couldn't improve it, and that was, standards drive improvement. So,
Great. Thank you,
uh,
Richard, for
uh,
this, for your time and for sharing your experience and your reflections. I really appreciate that.
no, well, thank you for for coaching me a little bit, and keep doing it.
Great.
Um,